I tend to go to like, as we all maybe do, the things that have worked in the past, right? And feel sort of safe. And recently I've really gone like, I want to shake this up because we both know how easy it is to become, I'm not 25 and young, cool guy anymore. If I ever was, and now it's like, in the words of Tropic Thunder, I'm on the wrong side of 40, which is a good place to be. And so I just, both for my sort of, hopefully ability to, stay relevant and for my own just sort of soul and kind of creative soul, want to really shake things up and start in a real way. And this is just in the last year or two, challenge myself. And so I used to be really scared of, easy examples like scared of pitching. I want to shoot this on film. Do you know what I mean? And because nowadays, like, oh my God, the cost and the this and the that, and we won't have dailies for 4 days and all that stuff.
Right.
And now I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to just pitch my heart out and give them the most sort of blue sky version I can imagine. And hopefully, if nothing else, my passion for it will come through. And even if down the road we go, hey, Lee, we can't afford film and here's why. And I've, decided to put down my sword on that issue, at least the sort of passion for it that I wanted to like set the bar as high as I can. And I try to, hopefully that, if nothing else, resonates with an executive.
Let's Shoot with Pete Chapman is a podcast on directing for anybody that's, quite simply, ever watched anything. Visit PeteChapman.com to get your official podcast merch, hoodies, hats, jackets, mugs, and other swag, and learn more about your host.
Let's Shoot with Pete Chapman is sponsored by the good folks at Scriptation. Scriptation is the Emmy Award-winning app for production that allows you to mark up scripts, transfer notes, generate breakdowns, and so much more. No matter where you fall on the call sheet, Scriptation makes it easy to go paperless, collaborate with your crew, and save hours of time. Go to scriptation.com/Pete to learn more and receive a special offer exclusive to Let's Shoot listeners. Now, on to the show. All right, here we go. All right, welcome to episode 71 of the show. This is Let's Shoot with Pete Chapman. And on this season 5 finale, we welcome one of the most prolific television directors in the game, Mr. Lee Toland Krieger. If I'm not mistaken, Lee is about to finish directing or very recently finished directing the series finale for You, a show for which he did the pilot. This was a conversation born out of my genuine interest in chatting with a director that I admire. As I mentioned in last week's outro, Lee also directed the pilots for Dead Boy Detectives, Superman and Lois, Shadow and Bone, Prodigal Son, Deadly Class, NBC's upcoming medical drama Wolf, and more. I need to give a shout out to actor and writer Ozzy Tesfaye for introducing me to Renee Rife, an executive at Lee's 72nd Street Productions, who then made the connection to Lee. Now, this is an extended episode, so I'm going to keep this week's catch-up very, very short. I'm about halfway through production on my episode of Yellow Jackets, and it's going extremely well. It's going great. I've been able to prep more than maybe I have on any episode in the past, and it's really been reflected in both the technical and the creative execution of my vision. Obviously, that's super obvious, but I'm going to mention it because that's what we do on this podcast. You sweat and prep so you don't bleed in production. Now, before we get to the interview, I do want to ask folks, not for money, but for their voice. Consider this a crowdfunding to spread the word. It takes a lot of work, time, effort, coordination, etc. for the team here to put these episodes together, of which we've now done 71 episodes since June of 2020. We make sure we get them out to you on YouTube for those who like to watch, and then on all the podcasting platforms for those who like to listen. And It's really helpful for the show to get reviews, ratings, and if you like what you hear, to engage in commentary on all the various platforms. Make your voice heard. In fact, the more you do, the more we'll be able to craft our episodes toward the things that you want to learn more about specifically. So that's it. That's that. Review, and if I can make one more request, try and get 3 listeners for the pod this week. They can catch up on the show during our short hiatus and hopefully join you in anticipation for season 6 coming later this year. Lastly, I want to shout out Scriptation, our fabulous and exclusive sponsor. If you're in the film and television industry and not using Scriptation, I strongly suggest you check it out and streamline your process while elevating your creative execution. It's not only for directors, it's for script supervisors. My wife is a talented actor. She uses it on set. Editors, production designers, the ability to have all of your documentation and your creative brain in one place on one device without having to shuffle through papers while saving trees is extraordinary. So go ahead and pick up Scriptation. Use the special discount that we have for you at scriptation.com/Pete and get cracking. All right. So now I'm really done. Sit back, buckle up, and enjoy an intimate conversation, a director-to-director conversation with Lee Toland Krieger.
Roll sound.
Speed.
The interview. Take 1.
All right. So welcome Lee Krieger to the podcast. What's up, man?
Hey, Pete. So good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Man, it's an absolute pleasure. As I mentioned to you on the phone, like I feel like I knew who you were before I knew what you did in a way. You know what I mean? Because like there's so many shows where I was like, this Lee Toland Krieger guy is doing all the pilots. So, before we get to that, I'd love to just kind of know like where you're from and how you found your way into being enamored with storytelling.
Yeah. There's a long story. I'll try and, breeze through it somewhat succinctly. But I actually grew up in LA. When I was still pretty young, my folks moved out into the Valley, area called Westlake Village, which, not the most exciting place on the planet. But my folks were not in the business. And I first got into, this is very nerdy, but I first got into when I was probably like 7 or 8, I got into magic. And I remember like, just card tricks and whatnot. And I remember just really being enamored with, the idea of sort of like creating an illusion. Now I sound like Joe Bluth for a minute for the arrested fans out there. And then it was about that time I was introduced to 2 movies. One was Back to the Future, and the second was Terminator 2, which had sort of just come out. This is like the early 90s.
Yeah.
And both of those movies made a huge impact, would be an understatement. And so the sort of magic thing turned into, the special effects in, say, T2 with the T-1000 getting hit and
that was
the
so
liquid
cool.
metal sort of. Well, we're close in age. So like, I'm sure a lot of the same movies had
just
that
the one
sort
where
of big impact.
he got shot in the head and his like shit went like this. And then like,
I
was like,
absolutely.
I'll be back to see this next week.
100%. And I mean, look, I don't need to tell you that movie holds up so incredibly well. I actually rewatched it pretty recently, and it's astounding. Again, like if there's one sort of maxim in Hollywood, it's don't bet against James Cameron. You're going to lose every time. But so I started with I remember having my folks' video camera, which again, early 90s, it was about the size of your coffee table, right? And shooting what I didn't know at the time, it was effectively like a stop motion effect of I took tinfoil, made the sort of entry wound in the T-1000, and then shot little pieces of it kind of crumpling smaller and smaller until it went away. And I was able to like, with a, VHS stop record, like edit it so that effectively you get a stop motion effect. And I remember thinking that was, when I saw it kind of like work, quote unquote, it was just sort of an indescribable buzz. And it kind of gave me sort of a bug. So I even went like, I made a hoverboard because Back to the Future 2, of course, was another huge one. and shot.
And this was all linear editing. You were like, if
Oh,
you
yeah.
messed up, you had to go back, right? You were it was like-
100%.
yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
this is literally like, 2 VHSs. Cause again, I'm like 9 or 10. My parents are not in the arts and I'm just winging it. I don't, there's no, and anyway, to sort of like speed this up a little bit, I was one of the, I've had a number of very lucky things in my life, this being one of them. Down the street was a guy named Steve Perry, not the lead singer of Journey, if for those Journey fans out there, but a very prolific producer, especially in the 80s and 90s. And some of his credits, among others, include 3 of the Lethal Weapon films, True Romance, which, is one of my all-time favorites, the Under Siege movies,
right.
a lot of that kind of like classic 90s muscular, guy action flick, right? But he had this really prolific run, and his daughter went to school with me, and he would see me in the neighborhood with this giant camera doing all these little kind of gags, for lack of a better description, not really even shorts. And he was really super sweet and generous. And he said, hey, if you ever want to come to a real film set, let me know. And I was like, yeah, immediately. And so it was a couple years later, he was shooting Executive Decision, the Kurt Russell, Halle Berry movie, ironically enough, on the Warner Brothers lot where I, which has now been a home for me for almost a decade. And I came to set, and I can still remember, the Steadicam operator with the rig on, and, of course, this is the days of film, and seeing that big mag, sort of rear mounted on the rig, and Halle Berry walking out of her trailer, and it was just like, oh my God. You know what I mean? This is 1995. I think that movie came out in 96. I mean, Halle Berry, 1995. Need I say more? I mean, it was just like, I couldn't talk. Turned your brain to scrambled eggs. And it was just the mystique of all of it was just like so overwhelming. The set, the airplane fuselage set and everything else. And so from then on, it's safe to say I was like, this is what I want to do. And so cut to a few years later, I applied to film school at USC. Steve was one of my recommendation letters. And I'd sort of, as I got a driver's license, I'd interned for him for a little bit. And then sort of lucky break number 2 was I started interning all over through film school, and I landed an internship with Neil LaBute. And again, now this is sort of 2001. And so Neil, especially at the time, had really turned his ultra successful career as a playwright into a very successful career as a filmmaker. And again,
what was it like In the Company of Men, right? Was that like the first?
In the Company of Men was his first movie that played at Cannes and Sundance, and obviously was his breakout. And then he had already made Your Friends and Neighbors. And so I started interning as I think they were shooting The Shape of Things with Paul Rudd and Gretchen Mol and Rachel Weisz and Fred Weller. Anyway, that was, about 01, 02, something like that. And again, lucky break number 2 was just Neil ultimately was very generous and started reading at that time stuff I was writing. And I'm sort of truncating this, but about the time I was graduated, I had sent that to him. He read it, responded to it, and said, look, I'll attach my name as an executive producer. And, was very forthcoming about, look, I'm not going to write a big check for you to go make this movie or be boots on the ground producing it. But my name on it will help get agents to read it, which again, at the time, I didn't realize sort of the impact of that, because we all know how hard it is to get anybody in town to read anything. You know what I mean? So you needed that sort of like, people sitting up straight that Neil is an executive producer on it. And so anyway, that film ended up getting made and playing at Sundance in 2009. And that got kind of my career going. So that's sort of the long story long of sort of where I'm from and how I fell into filmmaking.
That's great. And I can tell, I feel like that's probably something you've said in meetings and kind of introducing people to who you are and how you got into their office, I'm assuming.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm one of the, like so many people, I'm a big Paul Thomas Anderson fan. And I one of the things I left out of that story was, Boogie Nights was another sort of big movie for me, because that came out in 97. I was 14. And I
Right.
was sort of like, at that point, I was like, I want to be a filmmaker, but didn't really know what that meant. And then seeing Boogie Nights was sort of, at 14, exciting for two reasons. It's like, on one hand, it's about the porn industry, and there's,
Right.
but then sort of watching it was like, that kind of went away. And I started, I think for the first time, to a limited extent at least, sort of really appreciating the craftsmanship, you know what I mean? And
Right.
that kicked off a whole thing of like, well, who are his influences? And,
Right.
and then getting into doing that deep dive. But yeah,
That brings up,
anyway.
I was going to say, that brings up two questions, and I'll ask them. They're not directly connected, but I'll ask because I just flow and I'll forget if I don't ask them at the same time.
Yeah.
One, if you look back to Lee at that age, like, what was it about you that you think had someone like Neil and someone like Steve kind of like identify the promise? And then the other question would be, at what point did you recognize that either you wanted to write or you needed to write in order to, have something to direct?
Totally. No, two good questions. I mean, I think to answer the first part, with Steve, at least it was, partly just, I'm a young kid. I go to school with his daughter. He's probably just being a nice guy. And then maybe to a lesser extent, he could tell I was really feverish about this thing. I kind of caught the bug. And I'm sure to a degree, I would imagine he recognized some part of himself in there, remembering when he kind of caught the filmmaking bug. And I think with Neil, because again, I was a little older now, I'm, in college, I've never been the smartest guy. I've never been the hardest worker, but, I try and be good in a room, try and be friendly. And I do believe, charm can get you pretty far. No, I think that, and this actually goes to probably a larger topic that maybe we'll cover today, is like, regardless of what business you're in, I think you have to be good in a room. You have to be, kind of, when I think you and I even talked about it, when we're crewing up, it's like, do I want to spend 12 hours in a passenger van with that guy or that gal when we're scouting? That's a little bit of the test with everything. And I think that, trying not to come into a room arms crossed, as it were, has been really helpful. And I do think, look, I was eager, and again, especially at that time, was just sort of relentless in I'm gonna do this. And I do think, just to go even further down the rabbit hole, I felt like, well, I'm, a straight white guy from the suburbs. If I can't figure this out, what excuse do I have? I have no excuse. You know what I mean? I've had every advantage. Like, so I better fucking make it work. And I also think to a degree, the last thing I'll say is like, because my parents, and I wouldn't say they weren't supportive, but I also would say they weren't ultra excited about this sort of career path, that actually worked in my favor. This sort of like, I'm going to prove them wrong sort of thing, I think helped. And I think that Neil in particular probably saw that I had that fire in my belly and a little bit of that, desire to prove somebody wrong, I think resonated with him. So anyway, that's an earful for you, but I think those are the things that probably help.
That's great. I guess every time I ask that question, I'm waiting for the time where someone tells me they were not aware of that engine in them, because it feels like it's almost, there are people who fall into the director's chair or whatever thing they might do in this industry. But a lot of people, it's really like this predetermined self-possession, by any means necessary, that like, powers you through the bullshit, quite frankly. So I was just very interested in where that, and when you had identified that. So moving back, so you took, was it a feature to Sundance? Your first feature to Sundance?
That's right. Yeah. It was called The Vicious Kind. And yeah, shot it in 2008, played at Sundance in 2009. And it starred Adam Scott, Brittany Snow, J.K. Simmons, and Alex Frost. And we made it for under $1 million, shot it on 35. And it, still to this day, one of, if not the best experiences I've ever had, because, and again, I didn't know how lucky I was at the time, but, wrote that, directed it, produced it, had the financier, the person that sort of wrote the check for the lion's share of it was, incredibly kind and generous, and really kind of just let me make my movie. I mean, I really had sort of carte blanche in a way that, I haven't had since, right? It's
what a way to enter! What a way to enter the industry.
Exactly. Which again, I didn't appreciate it fully. No, but it was a wonderful experience. In large part because, it was a little like, I was 25, which is crazy, but 25 years old. We're out in the woods of Connecticut. It's freezing, but I'm with a bunch of. I mean, I can't imagine what JK and Adam thought at the time, because it's a bunch of 20-year-olds running around who, been out of film school for 10 minutes and trying to figure this out. But they were, and all four leads, Adam, JK, Brittany, and Alex, were just so sweet and so kind and so great. And, again, this was not a show where they had a lot of creature comforts. And
right.
I'm sure they're looking at me like, does this kid have a fucking clue? And the answer was not really. And that also, like, as that could have really gone the other way, and again, looking back at sort of the idea of that I had such an easy time, both with, the people that put the money up and with the cast. And Adam, as a sort of footnote, because he and I have stayed in touch, and he's just such a wonderful guy. He had his son, his eldest son, Graham, who's now a teenager, was, a toddler, and Naomi, his wife, who's equally wonderful, was newly pregnant with their daughter. And like, they're like, what do we do? What are we doing here? Basically.
Right.
But he was still, he was still so great. And he's really, for anybody that's seen the movie, and not a perfect movie by any means, but Adam's performance in particular is so outstanding. He ended up being nominated for a Indie Spirit Award, and he just gave it his all, probably with the thought of like, well, nobody's ever going to see this, but still,
right.
completely devoted himself. And that's something I, remain grateful to him for, and think about a lot as I plod along, but that was the first movie. And I will say, just Pete, just kind of riffing here, one of the things I was not prepared for, which I wish I had been, was sort of like, you go into Sundance and it's like, oh, I've made it. This is it. I'm good. And I didn't have the next script ready. I didn't have the next idea. And I also didn't really have a plan to like make ends meet between then and the next gig, which ended up being a few years, which is actually pretty quick, or maybe it was 2 years.
Yeah.
And that's something that I really wish somebody had prepped me for. And so if there's anybody out there sort of, watching or listening that is in that place of sort of first big festival movie, or, on the cusp of that, having the next one sort of loaded in the chamber, and in addition to that, sort of a game plan for like how to make it, and I mean like pay your electric bill kind of thing between the, that was just something I think I got sort of just, I got derailed a little bit because I was so underprepared. I just sort of figured, naively that, oh, I've had a film at Sundance, like, okay, the next job is going to just be right on top of this, and it's going to pay me well. And
I have
I'm
a
not sure
theory about that, because
please.
I went to NYU, I taught at NYU for a long time. And I just think that to provide the reality of the industry would kill tuition. You know what I mean? Like, because like you would
smart.
just be like, well, what the fuck am I about to drop, all this money for when you're telling me when I come out, like, it's not going to matter and only the cream will rise to the top. And that cream is going to be more people, like you said, who are good in the room than talented. It'll be more people who are like hardworking and persistent than talented. Cause that, like I always say, like I put myself in that box where like in film school, there were people whose work, like I was just like I should just quit. You know what I mean? Like I would watch, I'm like, we got the same fucking camera. Like as far as I understand, like we have all the same resources, but like your work is phenomenal. But like maybe what they didn't have, maybe they had, actually, I think they had the success that you had, but didn't have the like, okay, well, let me recalibrate. And okay, it's not enough to make a great film. What do I have to do? And yeah, you're right. It's not out there. And even like, when I taught production, I would have like the final class of the year because it was like a 5-hour day, every week with me.
Sure.
I had a whole thing for post-graduation. And a lot of students, like years later, would be like, I see what you were trying to tell me, but you also don't want to hear it because it's like, that's not going to be me, like I'm going to be the one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's a tough one.
No, you're so right, Pete. And again, even after my next movie, which was called Celeste and Jesse Forever, which played at Sundance in 2012. So 3 years later. So again, in film timelines, not a crazy long time. It was still the same sort of thing of like, oh, I still got to sort of hustle and figure out what the next move is and how do I pay my bills between now and then? And, it's just, it's all of that again, I was not equipped for, I wasn't prepared for. And I wish somebody had sort of said, hey, you better wake up to this reality because it's going to, knock you in the teeth. But those were my first two. And that's something that I still feel like I'm glad you're talking about it or have talked about it with students in the past, because I feel like it's not covered enough,
Now, were you writing things that were in line with the inspirations that you've mentioned, like, T2 and Back to the Future? Or, were you like, did you have a like plan on like, I'm going to write this kind of thing to get to this type of career? Or was it a different type of progression?
No. I mean, I wish I could say I did have more of a plan, and I wish I had a little bit more confidence as a writer. I think, looking back, so I wrote The Vicious Kind in the sort of vacuum of I'm in college and, I don't know anything, which is sort of that ignorance is bliss kind of thing. And I'm like, well, this will be, I'm going to write something kind of a chamber piece. It's going to be small and affordable. I can, find enough money that was really the thought, was just something small and affordable. Because we've all seen the sort of first films that, really require a budget and they don't have one. And then it's sort of like almost no matter how well you execute it, it still feels a little underwhelming because you just didn't have the sort of the means to do it properly. Anyway, but to answer your question, again, if I were to go back and do it over again, I would have really I would have been more disciplined about writing for myself and making that a daily routine. I mean, I know you've read or seen all the things. I have Jon Favreau talks a lot about this of like, every morning getting up and the first thing he does is sort of sit at his typewriter or computer or whatever and just write for 5 minutes and like keeping that muscle like any other active and not letting it atrophy. And I think I remember I wrote a couple things for hire after The Vicious Kind and really didn't like that experience and didn't do a very good job, quite honestly, because I was struggling so much with deadlines and sort of not writing from a place of just pure inspiration, the way you're writing your first spec, but really just trying to execute on somebody else's idea of the movie. And got sort of disenchanted with writing altogether and lost confidence, and felt like, okay, maybe I'm just maybe I can only be a director, and writing is not something I'm capable of. And I think weirdly enough, it's taken a long time. I'm 41 now, and I've just started to go, you know what? I'm going to write for myself again. And,
Yeah.
And part of it has been reading a lot of work by writer directors and realizing, not all these guys are Aaron Sorkin on the page, or,
Right.
Steve Zalian, or uh, take your pick of
Right.
great writers. Tony Gilroy, obviously being, one of my favorites, but like some of them are just, they're good writers, but they're writing
Right.
for themselves. So you, in a way, not that you don't want it to be superb, but like the threshold actually can be a little lower. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of, I've gotten back, thankfully, into the groove of writing for myself. And I think now, for the first time, it took me 15 years, but just going, you know what, the TV thing is a great business that I love and keeps my lights on, and
Right.
film can be where I'm just going to write for myself and be a little bit more precious and a little bit more selfish. But long answer to your question, which is, yeah, I didn't really have a plan, and I wish I had been more strategic, for lack of a better word, about like, just and at the very least more disciplined about just writing every day. And I'll tell you, I'll give you a quick a story, Pete, because I think you'll appreciate this.
Yeah.
Zach Penn, who I'm sure you know, prolific, incredible writer who's written on probably every giant studio movie for the last 20 years. He's the guy that, that all the studios call in and pay a fortune to fix their thing, but wrote Ready Player One, somewhat recently for Spielberg, and a ton of other amazing stuff. I was lucky enough to very briefly, I was developing a movie at Lionsgate that he was sort of supervising, got to know him a little bit. And one time I was writing something, I was stuck, and I said, "Hey, can I come over for like 5 minutes? I'll bring you a cup of coffee first thing in the morning. And I just want to, hammer this out with you, because I want to figure out how you do it." And one of the things he told me that I just loved was, he said, "Lee, early in my career, I would pay a buddy of mine to just sit in the room with me to make sure I was writing, and not surfing the web, grabbing my guitar. Oh, I'm going to run down the street and get a coffee and I'm up." All the things that we all, I think, succumb to when we're really forced. There's nobody over your shoulder. And that really resonated with me. Anyway, that all of which is to say, again, like, discipline as a writer, even if you don't think you're, Aaron Sorkin, I think is really great. Unless you really are sort of saying, I'm just a shooter, that's all I'm ever want to be, then fair enough. But I tell everybody,
it's a tough balance though too, because like when you mention like, I feel like you don't want to fall into I know how this is going to look because I'm going to shoot it. And then you leave out like the kind of wonderfully illustrative prose that Sorkin might add. Because you're like, oh, that's a 2-shot, and then we'll get this. So that is a challenge. But yeah, I'm from the same school, man, where like I'm just about page count. Like when it's early in the process, I'm like 5 pages a day, doesn't matter what happens, because in 2.5, 3 weeks, screenplay. And then we can tighten it up and I can realize how bad it was. But there's nothing worse than like looking at a blank page, a blinking cursor, and judging it. You just have to get it out.
That was the other thing Zach said was when he's really sort of like blocked, he'll just say, "Okay, I'm going to write the worst version of this scene." And I'm going to just put the worst version on the page. And that kind of frees you up, because I think a lot of people are this way. I'm susceptible. Like, I don't want to put a letter down if it's not going to be the perfect word. You know what I mean? Like you freeze up, and it resonated because I also, as a director, one of the things I'll say to an actor on occasion, especially if we're like, haven't quite found it, is I'll just say, "Okay, do it wrong. Let's do a take where we just do it wrong." And a lot of times that frees up an actor to be like, "Okay, you know what? I'm vulnerable, I'm exposed, crew standing there watching me try and do this thing that I can't get. And now the director said, I'm going to do it wrong. So I have the freedom to fail. Do you know what I mean? And I
Right.
think that's
Right.
a really important part of the process. So a lot of times now when I'm writing, I'm like, all right, I'm stuck. I'm just going to write the worst version of the scene. But inevitably it's like, okay, all right, well, there's this one line. It's kind of, and then it just, words on a page make it a lot easier than that blank, or the blinking cursor, as you said. So
I heard something on another podcast that actually freed me up for the next thing I write. And the guy, it was on script notes. And John August was saying, I write whatever scene I want to write because we shoot it out of sequence. Like, why do I have to like get through all of this? Like, if I want to write like the turning point of act 2, I'm going to write it. And I was like, you know what?
Great.
I'm doing that because half the time you're just kind of like biding your time and like, okay, I'm going to kind of half-ass through this scene because I really want to get to the end of act 1. But like, go ahead and write it. And that was kind of it's a minor thing. Sometimes you have these rules in your head that you subscribe to for no real reason other than like you haven't thought big enough. You know what I mean?
Totally.
But I thought that was an interesting take.
No, I love that. I love that. Again, anything to sort of free you up from just the analysis paralysis of sitting at the computer, I think is worth it. Another writer I worked with who's phenomenal. When we were trying to break something, he was like, "Let's go for an old man walk," and I was like, "Huh, what is it?" And he was like, "No, you." Every time he's breaking something, he's walking, and we would just walk around his block. And it was sort of based on the idea of, the reason you come up with ideas in the shower or when you're sort of driving, mildly focused on something else there is some sort of science behind, getting your brain to sort of do something rote and sort of loosening it up to find inspiration or whatever your, choice of word there is. But
the first director I shadowed was a gentleman named Michael Watkins, and I shadowed him on The Blacklist. And like super military dude, like hard ass dude. Like I got I got him a knife. I got him an engraved knife as a gift because I was like, I think I have an idea of what you might like. But he was like, read the script 12 times a day. Read it at a coffee shop. Read it while you eat your lunch. Read it in bed. And I do it. And he was right. Yeah. Like in those, like there's something that happens when you read it and you're surrounded by other people and just like. Even if it's background, it's a different, like, there's something different, something open in your mind that's different from when you're laying in bed or when you're, at your desk and it's like, I must find the work, and extract the beats of the scene. Like sometimes you just need to get the repetition of a read, which leads me into asking, how did you begin to transition into TV? Because what Jada has put together here, I see your first TV credit, and correct me if it's wrong, is Happy Land in 2014.
Yeah, that's that. Yep. For better or worse, that's my first credit.
How did that come together?
So, yeah, I mean, and this actually kind of goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago in terms of sort of like game plan and how to like, make ends meet as you're starting out. So I had made 2 features at this point. I'd made The Vicious Kind. I made Celeste and Jesse, but I was really, destitute is kind of a strong word, but I would say it was kind of bleak, and I was really determined to not ask for help and, just kind of trying to scrape together a life. And that came along as it was MTV was making this pile. It was single camera, but it was a half hour and written by a really nice guy named Ben Epstein, who is very talented. But, making it for MTV sort of means like you're making it for pennies. Right. I mean, first and foremost. And then there's, all kinds of bizarre restrictions on what you can and can't do that I won't get into, but it's just like, it sort of sounds almost like, if you were to satirize like bad studio and notes, and it was a bit of that. But we shot that, I think it was like the summer of 2013. I think I can say, it was a good learning experience for me. It was not a very good show. It did get ordered to series, which did help me get the next pilot. Do you know what I mean? It was like,
Right.
okay, well, I did a pilot and it got ordered to
Right.
series, which is just like the benchmark of success in, at least at the time, in making pilots.
Had they sought you out
Yeah.
because of your feature success?
It's a good question. I think I'm sure my name got put forward by my agents at the time, and that Ben had seen Celeste and Jesse and responded to it. I remember that, and that
Mhm.
helped. And then I went in and, like you have to do all the time, audition for the job. And this goes back to, being good in a room and,
Right.
and the truth is I did like the script. It got, again, what I've now learned in television, especially, is like, so your partners, your studio and network partners are going to have a lot to do with what the final product ends up looking like, but anyway, I think it was sort of, I auditioned for the job. It was a lot of folks raising their hand and Ben thankfully liked Celeste and Jesse. And I think the network had a lot of questions. Like, this guy's never done television, like not done a episode of TV. So he's going to do a pilot for us, so even though they were, not paying anybody well and it was made for very inexpensively, they were still understandably trying to protect their investment. So
Right.
won the job and got a series order. So felt like that was, a good start.
So in sticking with the land of the pilot, how did
Yeah.
you go from that to Riverdale?
I did one other pilot before that. I did the Happy Land pilot, and then I did another movie called The Age of Adaline, which we can come back to. Right after that, did another pilot for actually a producer who was a friend of mine, and it was a great experience.
Mhm.
That also got ordered a series. That was called Beyond. And so to get to the Riverdale of it all, Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa and Sarah Schechter at Berlanti and Ryan Lindenberg, who was at the time at Berlanti, saw that pilot and apparently really liked it, or so they said. And that was kind of what generated that meeting. So it was sort of, I felt like went into that room with a little bit of top spin in that I'd now done 2 pilots, both had been ordered a series, and Beyond, at least the pilot felt fairly well put together. I dare I say, patting myself on the back here. And I really loved the Riverdale pilot. I read it and was like, I think people see a high school show, and what I'm seeing is sort of like Brick meets Blue Velvet. And those were the two films that I was sort of, and so I built a deck, as we all do as we're auditioning for jobs, that was really, Brick meets Blue Velvet, and really
Right.
leaned into that. And again, that, started a relationship with the Berlanti camp and with Roberto, who, is still a very good friend. And, and it's funny, it was one of those things where we made the pilot, height of pilot season in Vancouver, crew was hard to come by, and we made it in 13 days. And it was like, I like what we did, but I could also have seen a world where, like, it didn't get ordered and nobody watched the show. And then sorry, I know I'm giving you the long-winded response here on this one, but I was
great.
supposed to go from Riverdale to do the last Divergent movie in that franchise.
Okay.
And that fell apart for reasons I won't bore you with right now, but that fell apart. And when it fell apart, Roberto said, "Hey, would you come back and do 102 and 103 of the show?" Now, because by this time, Riverdale had been ordered a series. And
Right.
still, I think expectations were pretty sort of modest at the time. And I remember we were shooting 102 when the pilot premiered. It was a mid-season, January. And the
Right.
numbers were like, it was like a 0.5, I think is what we could, right? Which is like disastrous, right? And I remember the line producer at the time, we were in a passenger van, and he was like, expecting a call from the network that they were just going to shut us down, like right then and there.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was like, and then, but what weirdly, what happened by the time we finished shooting that block, which was only, a few weeks later, I remember seeing on like, obviously your Instagram feed, you get, your algorithm, you get sent a lot of stuff on, what you're interested in and clicking up. But there was suddenly like a crazy surge of like fan made clips about the show.
Huh.
Like, and I was on a new to Instagram, like, what is this? And anyway, for whatever reason, it was like in that very short time, we went from like, we're going to get a call any minute that we're going to be shut down because that number was so abysmal to, is it catching on? It feels like, anyway, that was sort of the Riverdale journey, but I can go back to the pilot if you want to dig into that one further.
Yeah. Well, I guess because you did that pilot, he did Superman and Lois, Shadow and Bone, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, Prodigal Son. Yeah. So you were had a high batting average, my man. But like, how do you go in and do that pilot meeting? Like I know it's a mixture of good in the room, but like, how do you prepare? You just mentioned that you saw Riverdale as a mix of, Blue Velvet and Brick. But like, do you ever have any concern about like too much specificity may shift these folks towards something that they get cringy about? Mm-hmm. Or do you just say, here's my fucking take and here's how I, communicate it and you see where the chips fall?
I think it's more of the latter. I mean, I think I would rather go down swinging with just something that felt passionate and ultra specific. So even if that they balk at that, I think it's so be it. And I think that one of the things I really make an effort to do is, especially when building a deck and describing how you see the visual language for the show, is trying to not pick the kind of low-hanging fruit choices. You read something that clearly feels like, bad example maybe, but like, okay, this is a really a sort of a Fincher ripoff. And so I'm going to build a deck that is like his greatest hits. Yeah. Instead, I try and find something that's like way outside of that box because I'm in my mind, and again, I don't know that I'm correct on this, by the way, but this is the sort of way I've been operating is, a lot of directors are going to come in and give you here are the Fincher greatest hits in my deck. And it's going to be this shot from Seven that everybody loves. And then here's something from The Game. And then here's something from The Social Network and blah, blah, blah. I want to go in and go and say, well, you remember this moment from Days of Heaven? I'll go like Terrence Malick or, and just to try to, I feel like I always want to feel like I'm the best person in town for the job. And part of proving that is sort of coming in and saying, I'm gonna bring something to this that no one else can or no one else has thought of, if that makes any sense. And just to try and, feel like, again, you're coming in with a really specific point of view and it doesn't feel like, everyone else's, hopefully. That's at least the desire, right or wrong.
How is that meeting different on Zoom than in the room? But that's assuming that you've done these on Zoom.
Yeah, I have. I mean, I think one thing I will say about Zoom that I really like is the share screen ability, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is, because in the old days, I'll call it, you go in, you print it out, 3 copies of the deck or whatever it is, and you're trying to like curate the process going through, but inevitably you have the exec who's flipping ahead, right? Or you have the exec who's like, still 3 pages behind because they're distracted or whatever it is. And that always always put me at risk of sort of getting thrown off a little bit. And I do like the Zoom sort of share screen. I'm going to really time this perfectly with my pitch. And obviously sort of goes without saying, but whereas in the room, I would to a degree try and sort of memorize a script that I was going to give them in my pitch. And now it's sort of like, I can have my script here and know that I'm not going to miss anything. And I know that probably means it sounds a little more, scripted and performed, but at least I feel like I leave that meeting and I've said everything that I really wanted to say. I didn't, oh
Right.
fuck, I forgot to mention that one film and the reference and the
Or
casting idea of
sometimes
this.
like you have like a perfect like, transitional line between
Mm-hmm.
sections. And like when you start winging it, you just get into the like, wait, what's their face about? Oh, I should
Yeah.
just move on, and then you're like, man, that was like a really well crafted sentence.
Totally.
Gone.
And yes, I admit to still when I go into a room and I'm pitching something, and obviously it doesn't happen as much anymore just because of the way the world is now, but you inevitably always have an exec who looks like either they're about to fall asleep or they're,
Yeah.
literally they're double parked outside or somebody just
Right.
ran over their dog. And it's
Or
hard not to.
they don't know what this meeting's about.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so that used to really throw me off more than it. Now I'm like, all right, fuck you. And I'll sort of make a point of like grabbing that person's attention and bringing them back into the
Right.
meeting. And I think with Zoom, again, for better or worse, you don't see their faces as clearly because you share your screen and they become really little. And so
Yeah.
then it becomes just being focused on your performance and your script. And that's probably where my focus should be anyway, not being,
Yeah.
sort of a chip on my shoulder about people who are tuning out. But yeah, I mean, those are sort of the big differences. But I will say I pitched something recently. It was not for a directing job, but just pitching a show. And the showrunner wanted to do it in person, which was kind of great to kind of, flex that muscle again. But
Yeah.
man, it was scary. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was like, oh,
Plus you're like, you're not on your home turf. Like,
Yeah.
like I've got like basketball shorts on right now. You know what I mean? Like I'm like
right,
house
right.
shoes,
Yeah.
like I've got your whole like my prep document over here on
Yeah,
another
right.
screen. Like I'm
Yeah.
writing questions on this board. Like you lose that sense of like, I don't know if it's an advantage, but at least it's an equalizer,
Absolutely. Well, and Pete, how many rooms have you gone in where it's in person and you have the visual presentation to show, you got a sizzle, and you
Mhm.
were promised that, oh yeah, there'll be an assistant who will get it up, and you get in there and it's like the person who's led you into that
Right.
boardroom is like, I don't know how that works. I'll call the IT guy, and then here the execs are coming in and you're trying to shake
Right.
hands and say hello and be excited, and like the IT person's coming. It's just there's a clumsiness that
Yeah.
we get to sort of do away with, which I'm grateful for, because that always, freaked me out.
Yeah. But I guess in a nutshell, are you essentially like just moving through like this document? Here's look and feel, cinematography, lighting, production design, like kind of my overview of how all these departments come together to achieve a show that people are going to want to live with and come back to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's it. And I've never been an executive, and I don't envy all these TV execs who are hearing so many pitches every day. And you and I both read the numbers of like how many pitches they're hearing every week or how many spec pilots they're reading every weekend. And it's I try and tune that out because it gets a little scary. I think again, and I've been guilty of this, of like, visual language pitches for a job that start to feel a little similar. And I tend to go to like, as we all maybe do, the things that have worked in the past, right? And feel sort of safe. And recently I've really gone like, I want to shake this up, because we both know how easy it is to become, I'm not 25 and young cool guy anymore. If I ever was, and now it's like, in the words of Tropic Thunder, I'm on the wrong side of 40, which is a good place to be. And so I just, both for my sort of, hopefully ability to, stay relevant, and for my own just sort of soul and kind of creative soul, want to really shake things up and start in a real way. And this is just in the last year or two, challenge myself. And so
Yeah.
to put a finer point on that, I think with my decks, yeah, of course it's going to be generally, okay, here's my global philosophy for how I want to approach the visual language. here's the tone, here's the palette I have in mind, or here's like a palette for present day. And then when we're in the flashbacks, we're here. It's all the sort of, those are the meat and potatoes. But now within that, trying to really stretch myself and just like coming up with the film touchstone that feels out of the box, try to also come up with, specifics within, be it operating style or lensing or,
Right.
capture medium to that really tries to challenge it and tries to like, I used to be really scared of, easy examples, like scared of pitching. I want to shoot this on film. Do you know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Right.
And because nowadays, like, oh my God, the cost and the this and the that, and we won't have dailies for 4 days and all that stuff.
Right.
And now I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to just pitch my heart out and give them the most sort of blue sky version I can
Right.
imagine. And hopefully, if nothing else, my passion for it will come through. And even if down the road we go, hey, Lee, we can't afford film and here's why. And I've, decided to put down my sword on that issue, at
Right.
least the sort of passion for it that I wanted to like set the bar as high as I can. And I try to, hopefully that, if nothing else, resonates with an executive.
Yeah. And I imagine too that also like leaves you room for other concessions from them. Like
Absolutely.
he fell on the
Absolutely.
sword for the film thing, but 4 days of crane work. Fine.
Yeah, yeah,
Go-
exactly. No, you're so
know?
right. It's like with any gig, unless you're Chris Nolan or who, that kind of rarefied air of, 5 or 10 filmmakers in town, it's like you only have so many bullets in the chamber and
Right.
what are the sort of, okay, these are the hills I'm going to die on. But, having a few extra that in the back of your mind you're willing to let go of, you give them one,
Mhm.
hopefully makes the argument for the thing that you really do, is the hill you're going to die on, makes it a little easier because you gave them one. It's like any, sort of negotiating strategy, I suppose. But
Yeah.
no, I think
Yeah.
that's essential for sure.
Hi, I'm Cassius Nelson. I play Crystal Palace in Dead Boy Detectives, and you're watching Let's Shoot with Pete Chapman.
Transitions, a director's journey and motivational handbook, is Pete Chapman's book from Michael Weezy Productions. The reviews are in. Greg Berlanti says, "There's a reason why everyone who works with Pete falls in love with his work. The lessons he imparts here are invaluable. Do yourself a favor and read it cover to cover." From Sarah Gamble, Pete's sharing gold nuggets that will spare you a ton of wasted time and help you channel your drive, talent, and ambition in the most productive way. And from Jesse Williams, this business has everything to do with preparation and expectations. Transitions grounds lessons in reality while empowering our artistry to run free. Not an easy balance to execute. Transitions, a director's journey and motivational handbook, is available on Amazon and anywhere else you get your books. Don't forget about your mom and pop shops, people.
Let's Shoot with Pete Chapman is sponsored by the good folks at Scriptation. Scriptation is the Emmy Award-winning app for production that allows you to mark up scripts, transfer notes, generate breakdowns, and so much more. Personally, I use Scriptation daily on every production. While prepping to direct episode 306 of Showtime's Yellow Jackets, I was able to annotate and color code my script based on which timeline each scene occurred. Whether it's present-day New Jersey or 25 years ago in the Canadian mountains, being able to track the storyline at a glance allowed me to be quick and efficient on set and into post-production. This is just one of the ways I use the incredible features inside of Scriptation. Go to scriptation.com/Pete to get an exclusive 20% off Scriptation's premium toolkit, Scriptation Industry Pro. I wanted to ask you, I don't know if this is putting you on the spot, but since it's been a kind of recurring theme in the Lee Krieger school of being good in a room, are there like, I don't know, three principles that you could share so those who maybe aren't so good in the room can can spiffy up their presence, or those who are can recognize that they're doing things that Lee would do?
Oh, it's a good question. And again, I don't claim any of this is perfect. I'm just sort of going to tell you what has worked for me. I mean, I'll start by saying one of the best filmmakers I've ever seen in a room, or actually, no, I'll say the best, is Sean Levy. And I'm sure most people, certainly most people out there know his work in the film community, and listen to him on Smartless or watch an interview. That guy, I mean, look, he's a Yale grad. He's ultra smart to begin with, but in a room, the one sort of guiding principle I saw was he just seems more excited to talk to you about that show or that movie than everybody else. And it kind of goes back to, I don't know if there's a Scorsese quote, I think it was, but it was like, as a director, you have to love the project more than everyone else involved. And if you don't, you shouldn't be there. And I really believe that. And so when you come into a room, the way I saw Sean do it was like, he was like vibrating. He was like going to levitate off his seat. He was so excited to tell the executives about what this was going to be, look like, feel, why it was, going to be an iconic movie or show. And so that I think, to me, if you do nothing else, you have to come in and be ultra excited about telling them about the show. Because a lot of people feel that way, but then the nerves and whatever else sort of, I think, suppress that. And it's like, you've got to, I took acting classes in film school just because actually Neil LaBute said, I said, what's the most important film class I can take? And he's like, take an acting class. I go, huh? No. What's the more important film? No. Take an acting class. And it was the best advice I think I got in 4 years of college, because it was like, oh, you feel vulnerable and you're going to be a clown or you're doing improv. And it's like, oh, fuck. But I will tell you, it helped immensely in my job. It helped immensely when I go into a room and I go, oh, I'm putting on a performance. And I gotta be, not that the excitement's not genuine, but I have to make sure that is sort of reverberating off of me, if that makes any sense. So that's number one. The second thing, this is also a Sean Levy thing. I hope Sean doesn't mind me, ripping him off here. Leave them wanting more. And that's a really simple one, which is, don't make it too long. When you're done, don't linger in the room for positive feedback. Get the fuck out of there. Make it so that you're so excited, you're vibrating in the room, and then try and find that kind of gracious way of getting out of there quickly. Pitches should be 20, 30 minutes, absolute max, and then get out of there, because you want the people to go, oh man, that was great. Like, I wanted to ask him. Oh, we'll follow up with him. Like, that's what you want, I think. Right. You know what I mean? Right. So those are the two things. And then, I mean, the third thing probably goes without saying, but it's be ultra prepared, be like, to your point, have read the material bunch, be able to really, even if you didn't love everything in the script, you're meeting with a writer, your showrunner. And I do think, and again, it has to be genuine, but find the things that you really do love and tell that person, that you loved it. Because I do think, as a writer, you want to hear that this person is going to be precious and careful about the thing that they've spent most likely many, many years on, So, and I guess that's sort of folded into passion, but I do think making a point of saying to the writer, I love this moment, and this moment hit me so hard, and it's so special to me, and I want to make sure we preserve that, and on the day, I'm going to make sure we have time to really, whatever it is, just so that they feel like, hey, I'm in good hands with this filmmaker, because they're really going to protect what I've worked so hard for. And you should. That's not a bullshit get the job thing. I think it's different than feature filmmaking, because ultimately you're there in service of the showrunner's vision. I mean, that's the biggest difference, at least I've found. And maybe that's not the case if you're Martin Scorsese doing Boardwalk Empire, you're David Fincher doing Mindhunter, House of Cards. But for me, I'm there in service of the showrunner's vision, and I want to make sure that person knows I'm going to really be careful with it and protect it and try and, make it as great as I can.
Right. No, that's an awesome answer, man. How do you direct an actor who does not want to be directed?
It's a good question. I've worked with those people before. Um, Gosh, man, I wish there was a simple answer to this. I remember. Just a quick story, and then I'm gonna give you my answer, which is I had the same question. I was going to direct The Age of Adaline. Harrison Ford had just signed on. Obviously, he's a hero of mine. I called Gavin Hood, who had directed um, Harrison,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, "Look, Lee, how do you direct? It's like, how do you direct people? Every person's different. Every person's going to respond to different things."
Right.
Which I think is good advice, and just globally going into the job. I think for me, one of the things I like to do, and this is not just for actors who don't want to be directed, but is I always want to have a conversation with them about what they like and what they don't like. So here's a good example. To an actor, do you prefer to go first when we get into coverage? Or is warming up helpful and you'll go last? I can't promise you,
Mm-hmm.
Joe Schmo, that I can always get to you first if that's your choice. But at
Right.
least I know that, and I'm going to do my best to
Right.
accommodate you. And I think even number one, it's helpful as a filmmaker to know that and to really try to deliver on that. But I also think for an actor, it says right away, this person cares about my need, and I'm not going to be a prop, right?
Right.
So I think that's important. More to the point of actors that don't like to be directed. I mean, I have worked with actors who don't like to be directed or just want to do their own thing. And the lucky part for me, at least in those experiences I've had, is mostly those actors have been pretty good. So I'm
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, their instincts are pretty good. So generally what I will do is I will try to make it more about technical direction. And I'll give you an example. I was doing a pilot with maybe the best actor I've ever worked with. I mean, this person was extraordinary, but I could tell didn't really want to take direction. So I would say to him, hey, I won't say his name. So I said, God, when you gave me that, right? Oh my God, it was absolutely brilliant. I love what you did there. There's this little bit of eye, like if I want him to move, like he's not on his mark, instead of saying like, you're not on your mark, just say, if you just lean in a little further, we're going to get this great highlight. It's really going to punctuate what you just did. So I try to be honest. I try to massage it with flattery and, that. And I know that's kind of, I'm sure a lot of people listening are like, what a, bullshitty kind of thing to do. I'm sure there's a better method out there.
Man,
That's
I
what's
don't know.
worked for me.
I think that anyone know, I mean, if I extract from this conversation, like good in the room doesn't stop inside four walls. It happens on a set too, right?
Absolutely. 100%.
And like there's a translation that's happening in the sense of like, everybody's hearing what you're saying through the prism of like what they're doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
So like you saying, hey, if you hit your mark, you help me, versus like if you lean into the light, you help you. And it's such a more efficient way to get the same thing. Because at the end of the day, you want them in the fucking light. So like how do you get them there without having to feel like, a dictator?
1,000%. And it's also, and Pete, this better than anybody. It's like, especially on any TV schedule, pilot or episode, you just don't have a lot of time to go 12 rounds with an actor. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure if you're doing a Marvel movie and you have an actor who wants to, be a pain in the ass, there is in theory the time to kind of, duke it out and arm wrestle.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that in TV, you really don't have that time. And if you don't make your day because the actor is being difficult, the producers don't go to the actor at the end of the day. They come straight to you and they go, what the fuck? You're the person with the bullseye in your head.
Right.
Fine.
Right.
Fair enough. So it's sort of like some of this has just come out of survival. Like, how do I get what I need, make my day? And another cousin to what I just said is sort of like, they'll say a line. I'm like, well, I want them to go further with that. But instead of saying, hey, can we lean into that or go, I might say, oh my God, I love what you did there. Let, let's, can you even give me more of that? It was so amazing. Yeah, again, it's the same principle of like, going in and just sort of massaging. Let's be honest. Like all of us are in the arts. Most of us, I include myself in this group, are insecure, and a
Yeah.
little bit of flattery will help coax along even the most sort of tricky personality. At least that's how I've been managing, for better or
I
worse.
it's always I always say be a person, just be a person. And I
Yeah.
think like, you I'm sure have felt it. Like you go somewhere, they say, "Oh, Lee, oh man, been wanting to talk to you. Like that thing you did in that scene of that episode." And you're
Sure,
like,
of course.
"Tell me more. Come on,
Yeah.
tell me more,
Yeah.
please. You're a good
Well,
guy." Like what
because I know I told you this, I don't get to talk to a lot of other filmmakers, or at least job means I don't get to interface with a lot of other directors. What's your trick with that? Because
Oh
I
wow.
know you've been, what's your move? Because I would love to have a few more tricks up my sleeve, you know?
Y- I again only mine has come to fruition out of the because again, right, like in even in your I didn't do as many films as you, but I came from indie film to TV where it
Right.
was like, well, I wrote this thing. Here's what we're going to do. You know what I mean? Like I have a perspective.
Totally.
Let's try this, and I quickly learned like there was not a lot of interest in trying things in TV because,
Yeah.
that I've done 82 episodes of this and what you're asking me to
Wow.
try, I did in episode 3 and it doesn't work.
Yeah, right, right, right,
I
right.
just
Yeah.
don't want to do it. Like
Yeah.
cool idea, young buck, but I would
Mhm.
rather eat
Mhm.
lunch in the next 20 minutes. So
Yeah.
I began to ask questions rather than say like, hey, let's do this. Or blah, blah, blah. I really just kind of go from what do you think about this? You know,
Mhm.
uh, and another thing, I actually have this post-it note right here on my computer, which I took from somewhere. So I wish I could properly credit it, but like, it's to say I feel versus I think.
Mhm.
Because when
Mhm.
like, you can argue with what I think, but
Yep.
if you
Yep.
can't argue with what I feel, or, like you mentioned, the kind of, the hypothetical, like what if we were to do this? Or if I'm going the most direct I'll be is I like to try,
Right. Right.
So it's all very like kind of gentle prodding. And what's interesting too, and you have kids is like, as you have, wow, this sounds, as I think about what I'm about to say, I don't mean it this way, but like, but, but as you raise your kids, you find like
Yeah.
you get the most result when you have a lighter touch
Right.
and you invest everybody in the process of getting to where you want to go. And then I always say too, like I am having been a PD, I have a greater appreciation for like what that crew is going through when I get in the van as a visiting
Yeah.
director. They
Yeah.
know where the fuck we should shoot. They know. Like
Right. Yep.
you've looked
Yep.
at 8 locations, you picked 3 for me to look at, but like he better pick this one.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so like and they
Yeah.
all have to walk around and like let me like look around at it and okay,
Mhm. Yeah.
and I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, everybody, if I get that grace, then I should be able to create an environment where other folks and then I think what happens is when you really do need to be like either super technical, or like I really feel like this should be like this. Like for instance, I just did that the 3rd episode of the final season of You, and there
Yeah.
were like 5 scenes in the kitchen. And
Mm.
I was kind of more, I want to be gentle with the adjective I picked for myself. I was more particular than I might normally be because I was like, I can't have the same master. I don't want to be
Right.
shooting these
Right.
5 scenes from the same place. So like, I understand like you don't want to do that, but like, can we compensate with this? Because in the next 2 scenes, like I want to be over here because that's where the better position will be for the bigger scene. And then they're like, oh, okay.
Right.
And finding at what point you want to really explain your process. Cause most of the time, like you said, you kind of just want to nudge, but sometimes you do have to be like, this is some technical shit or the worst thing to say, like, this is kind of for the audience. And I hate to land there, but if you do the things we're
Sure.
talking about, I feel like you can get there and it can be received without it
Yeah.
being like you manipulating technical, hack.
Right. No, but you're absolutely right. I mean, if you save that one card for one time an episode, then you're more likely to get it, even from a cast that is burnout or rigid, or you know what I mean. If
Yeah,
as long as you're not doing that every day, I think they're they've been
exactly.
gracious. And yet, no, you're right. I mean, having two young kids, it's like, you know, they're the greatest negotiators there are, because they will just wear you down into a fine dust. They're the war of
Yeah,
attrition. They win every time because they're like, I got nowhere to be. I'm just gonna continue to
right,
argue for the
right.
lollipop or whatever it is.
I'm 3,
So
so
yeah, exactly.
I don't know what kind of time you have on your hands, but
Totally. I've got all day, and I've got no shame about having a meltdown right in the middle of this public place. Or whatever it takes, all I'm going to do.
right,
No,
right.
I think you're absolutely right. Well, no, it's always just interesting to compare notes, especially on that one, because, you know, again, like the Gavin Hood thing, every actor is a little different, and a lot of actors are different from the sort of, oh, you have the meeting and it's a more a social setting, and then
Yeah,
you get into the work environment and it's like, wait, who's this person? This is a different,
right,
you know what I
right,
mean? And
right,
so it's
right,
like, you have to kind of brace yourself for a bit of that, or at least manage your expectations that
right.
the person that's the life of the party isn't necessarily going to be that when you get to work, and
You
I've
also, I
learned that
think,
lesson
have to still
before.
be willing to expose yourself, because
Mm,
like now I'm thinking about it because we're talking about it, but like,
yeah.
like you is an interesting thing to direct because Penn's so internal,
Yeah.
and he's thought everything out so well with such a
Right.
nuance.
Yeah.
And you as a director are trying to find like, okay, well, like I know the voiceover is doing the work, but is there ever a moment where like your face betrays something? You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
trying to carve that out, or like, trying to like find a different take. And there was one time where like I was like, well, what if we try this? And he was gracious and he tried it. And then I stopped and I was like, you're right, that shit don't work.
Yeah. Right.
you,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like I
But
was like,
that's,
but like I gotta know too. Like because
yeah.
you've done it, but like I have to like kind of experience it too. So I don't feel like, I've left something off the court because I
Totally.
just assumed what everybody's doing is perfect, even when it is.
And Pete, I think you just identified something that I think is really important. I mean, I don't think you want to be in the habit of like every third take going, "Hey, I'm sorry, that was a bad note I gave you." But on the occasion you try something that doesn't work and the idea came from you, I think it is important to sort of be able to label that,
Yeah,
because I think an actor, especially the good ones and the smart ones that have worked with a lot of filmmakers, I think they appreciate you being able to say like, "Hey, we tried something, but I didn't double down on my bad idea just to kind of, win the power play, right?" And
right.
and go, okay, and also that you're a good judge of performance, and that you're going to be a good, you know neutral party to view
Hmm.
their performance. I think being able to identify that is
Yeah,
is really smart. Yeah, I mean the pen and the you thing is so interesting because like you, maybe that show, I hadn't really done anything with like a ton of voiceover, right?
mm,
And I think Penn, at least on that pilot, we both were like, man, there is so much, and timing it so that that when it's this VO is meant to be from between this line, and then he's going to walk to here, and he's going to have more dialogue, and we
right.
want to be able, and him to be able to express that. And I think, I don't know, I'm interested to see how Penn season 5 is from Penn season 1, and now he's directed, right? He directed
Yeah,
the episode in season 4, so
yeah.
it's it'll be interesting.
So this is another, some questions I found, maybe it's directing style too, but I feel like the more broad it is, maybe the better answer I get. And so I like to ask directors, like, you know, if there's one part of the craft that's most personal to you that you would want to take this time to impart to other directors, emerging directors, or, whoever might be listening, like, what is it and why? And like, for me, I always say like, it's block, because in TV, like if I'm on a show where it's very, very controlled language, I can maybe, you know, elevate that language a little bit based off of where the people are and how they move, because the camera's going to have to compensate or cover it or whatever. But like, what might it be for you?
Oh, that's a really good question. A tough one to answer. Well, let me just say, just to build on what you just mentioned, for especially young filmmakers, I found blocking to be, at least I was a critical studies major at USC. I was not production. So to maybe take this with a grain of salt, I found blocking to be one of those things that is probably the least discussed and the most difficult to learn and to get good at. Because not only are you trying to do something that is best for performance, but it also has to be this beautiful dance with camera. And it's something that the best versions of it are invisible. You know what I mean? Just look so effortless. I mean, watch the Coen brothers. Do you know what I mean? It is just like, it looks like, well, anybody could do that. Paul Thomas Anderson, I think, virtuoso when it comes to camera and blocking. Not a director du jour right now, but Woody Allen, I thought was wonderful with blocking. There's a lot of them anyway, but it is one of those things where it's sort of it can be invisible. So I just wanted to sort of mention that, because I do think it's one of those things where, I didn't do much theater growing up. And like, I wish I had, like Neil's advice of go take an acting class. I wish I'd also, taken some theater to sort of really get better with blocking. But in any event, it's sort of a similar answer, which is, I'm of the belief, and not everybody subscribes to this, but I'm of the belief that your job is as much technical as it is working with the actors. In other words, to come into it, especially if you're coming into a television show, I don't think it's fair to come in and just be, I'm going to work with the actors and then I'm going to turn to the DP and the operators and they're going to figure out the coverage. I don't think that's directing. And similarly, it's not directing if you come in and be like, oh, I got this great shot here and this great shot here. And then you turn to the actors, well, what do you guys want to do in this scene as you come in the room? Like, that's half the job. And so I would just say that, everybody's got their own, strengths. Some people are great at both. I feel like I'm slightly better at one, but I would say, in my view,
can I ask which one?
Yeah, I feel like I'm better with camera, and I think that because I think I like it a little more. I really enjoy technical stuff. It's going back to the top of our conversation, the magic of it. I love it.
Right.
And I like to think, although I'm sure there's actors and people who've seen my work who would dispute this, but I like to think I've gotten much better with actors and much better at also. I remember, I'll give you a very specific example, Pete. When I made Adaline, I'd shot listed the shit out of it. I'd storyboarded. We had previs, and I got so locked in. And I was 30 years old, and I was scared. And I remember, actors coming up to me and be like, "Hey, Lee, instead of me turning here, could I just stop?" And I remember just like locking up and being rigid and not being a generous filmmaker, and really like resisting it, because no, I've got this plan and I know this plan works. And so this is an example of like being too sort of technically devoted. Right. And now I like to think I've gotten better of going like, I can still actually stick to my plan and just have their idea, which, well, actually that's a good idea. That's better than what I had. And it makes the blocking look more lively and natural and not manufactured. And I can fold it into the coverage, or I could, I'm just not as scared anymore. So anyway, but to answer your question, I'm more comfortable with camera, and I love camera. I just do. I love to get into the geeky technical stuff and lenses. I love to just geek out on, but I'm discovering a new appreciation for what we're talking about, for blocking. And because I go back and watch earlier work of mine and I go, it is too rigid because I was so focused on these perfect frames that the blocking suffered and it doesn't feel as lived in as it should. Does that make any sense?
It does. It does. I mean, I, as a film school guy, like I remember watching Jacques Tati movies, and it was all about like static frames where the movement was the people coming in and out of frame,
Right.
almost in like a
Right.
proscenium stage.
Yep.
And, I've always been like, there will be times where that'll be something that I can rely on to keep it interesting if I don't have time or if the location doesn't have a very interesting angle.
Sure.
All the things that pop up on a show that you're left to kind of figure out. And I hear you on camera because there's a world of like maybe I'm extracting something, but I feel like we might be similar in the sense that like I love the debate, right? I love to get into and I can do that with the camera crew. I can't always do that with the actors.
Totally.
Because they're just like, you gotta say the right fucking thing. You know what I mean? Like just the right amount of words.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
that's right.
And also I've learned like I say it and I walk away. I don't wait for like any engagement because half the time I'm just gonna get a blank stare.
Right.
Even though, and it's just the processing of it. It's like I know
Yeah.
that the processing kind of feels like a middle finger sometimes. So like I'll just walk away and then watch the take. And then usually what we discussed happens. But all the little things that I do for my own like insecurity. But like what's interesting though is I'm thinking of the converse of what you're talking about with Adaline, which is I don't know where I read too much stuff. I can't attribute anything, but it was Liam Neeson talking about Schindler's List, and he reached out to another friend, actor friend, probably some icon or whatever, and he was like, the guy's telling me everything to fucking do. Like he's telling me where to stand, blah, 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 when to turn. And the friend was like, maybe you should listen. and then he relented and,
it worked out okay.
It worked out all right.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, look, I get that it's hard for actors if you're not, Spike Lee, you're not Steven Spielberg, whatever, you're not an icon where it's just like, you're going to say, yes, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, like, of course. And they have this body of work that just proves like, just listen to this motherfucker and it's going to be fine. I get that, I don't come to the job with that, unfortunately. But what I will say is like, I think the vast majority of really good actors that I've been lucky enough to work with, they want to be directed and they also know that they're just in their body and that, you're watching, you're in theory have the canvas of the whole thing in your mind, but you're also sitting back and watching it unfold and have that 10,000 foot view, and that they need to sort of, and again, I'm just jumping off of the little bits I learned from, my days of doing some terrible acting at USC, which again, so helpful to be like, oh, this is terrifying. And I'm just having my own experience here and trying to do, but I can't be thinking about what this looks like or feels like, or did I hit the mark? Am I in my light? Have I overstepped my mark? And I'm in their light, all those things. Like a good director needs to be there to sort of help guide them. And I think most good filmmakers, good actors, are going to lean on a filmmaker for at least some of that. But I don't know where I'm going with this, Pete. I'm rambling now. But yeah, the blocking or the sort of actor versus technical stuff is an interesting convo. And I'm always, I know especially as a PD, I'm sure you've had filmmakers come in and just like want to do one or the other. And I always, maybe that's okay. I just always found that to be like, you're doing half your job, but tell, what are your thoughts on that? Am I being unfair?
I've definitely, no, I agree. I feel like, well, okay. Let me get a little more granular. I agree for myself. I agree with you for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are, I don't know, there are a few different profiles of TV directors, right? There are those who do the job, take the hits, and adjust who they are to survive. And that may be, I'm not going to talk to actors. I'm just going to fucking come with a plan, and let the camera crew execute my plan.
Mm-hmm.
Then there are those who are kind of ready-made to fit. Like they've come out of the packaging ready to just kind of not offer much. I hate to say it.
Sure.
And then I think there are those who are like, I really want to be a filmmaker. I want to tell a particular type of story. And maybe they have higher aspirations and they're willing to do the extra work or take the extra hits en route to getting to the types of shows that they want to do.
Right.
And, so I say that thinking of myself as that person. Like I do more shows. I do shows now that I wanted to do 7 years ago. And in the beginning, I treated the shows that I did the way I treat these shows. So it was like, I'm gonna block this in a super interesting way. And then I know it won't be what I can do, but I'm not gonna let that muscle atrophy. And I'm gonna find the part where like you and I were talking about this 2/8 of a page thing I have to go shoot. And it's like, folks coming down the stairs and it's like, like the kid, it's the father and then son and daughter. And I'm like, okay. And they come downstairs to the sidewalk to the car. So I'm like, there's a whole lot of possibility here. I could just be like, oh, I'll keep the camera here or whatever. Then or you have to think about, do you have a crane or whatnot? But the way I've thought about it is like, they mentioned the car. So I was like, I'm pretty sure this car is an integration. So that's telling me I need to maybe start.
Shoot the fucking car.
Shoot the logo, right? Shoot the fucking car. And then I'm like, well, I can kind of come over the car and like find the first kid because he's got the first line, then reveal the dad who's got the second line, and then let the daughter give her third line on a drive-by as she goes to the back seat. And then, get my coverage here. And it's going to be a more complicated first shot because the timing's going to have to work and we're going to have to boom up over a car and counter. Yeah. But like, why the fuck not? But like,
why are you there if you're not going to push it? Right. Because if you're just talking about the shot, reverse, wide, over, whatever it is, like, well, the TP and the operators can do that. The actors, you know what I mean? That's kind of my approach too. You know what I mean? It's like, well, I'll just stay at home if it's going to be that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, so I feel like I agree. It should be both parts. And I also feel like, you end up having, I know this is not negative. I feel like you have to have a couple battles with all sides on every episode. And maybe not battle, but like there's something you're standing up for. Like I find like on every show, there's a point where I'm kind of like really having to push for this being a one camera setup because there's like, everybody just feels like two cameras have to be rolling at the same time. And that means both are getting nothing to some degree.
Oh, I talk about this all the time. You merge both, instead of having one really great frame, you've got two mediocre frames for A and B to accommodate each other. And I hate this. And I keep going, Pete, but I have a question for you about this very thing.
So that's a thing that comes up, and it's like I just feel like you need to, you got to ask the questions that back to you. Like there's we're in Joe's office and have a whole like kind of social media deep dive in the office, and I was like, well, can we cut a hole in the ceiling here? And then and they got and had a couple meetings, and then they cut a hole in the ceiling, and I was like, great, now this, and then like we do a cool, like a cool shot, like you gotta. I think you're there to push towards something that the show wants to be.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Well, yeah, stretch it and push the envelope. Because again, if you're just coming in to do wide and over, and again, especially if you're coming into a season 5 show, your actors kind of know the drill to a degree. The camera department knows the language of the show. You know what I mean? It's sort of like it can be this kind of machine that just kind of rolls along. And so if you're not there to really shake it up and offer something new, and again, I know you have to sort of do it in the general confines of the language of the show. You're not going to suddenly be like, and now it's Mr. Robot and ton of headroom. You know what I mean? But well, here's a question for you, Pete, because you've done a lot of this, and it's something I continue to struggle with. which is that balance of wanting to push the envelope, wanting to, I'm borrowing this from a producer, but don't be afraid of greatness. Thane Watkins taught me that. Don't be afraid of greatness. And then at the same time, it's like, especially in 2024, post-strike, post-pandemic, contraction everywhere we look, like you gotta make your days. You just have to. And, I'm sort of constantly, as as a filmmaker, especially in TV, you're sort of so much of the day feels like managing a clock and not creative, right? And how do you going into a job go, I know how I'm going to make sure this still feels like it's pushing the envelope and gratifying creatively, and I'm bringing something new to the show, and yet it's not going to make it so that I'm doing 14-hour days and don't get everything. And then I leave the show and they go, thanks a lot, Pete. We have a $200,000 hole to dig ourselves out of. You know what I mean? And as a PD, you've been the one kind of on the hook for that as filmmakers come in and do that. And then suddenly you're left holding the bag, figuring out how am I going to claw that money back? You know what I mean? It's what's your philosophy in terms of that kind of push pull of like creatively getting it, but also making your day?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think, and first, like, I'm enjoying this conversation very much, man. This is good. I feel like
likewise.
the people who are listening or watching are getting like a real, like, kind of ideal version of the podcast, which is like two folks having a beer talking about what they do,
Yeah.
But like, I'll tell you, man, like I'm being super honest here. On You, we had Marcos and it introduced the first, it's before the contract requires it, but basically, he implemented the director's cut goes to the producers, and then you get their round of notes, and then you get 2 more days. And so it was great. And it was kind of, and the notes were great from Justin and Mike, but like, it was the first time for me, like, I was like, I've never seen these. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
yeah, I know. That's
and
crazy. Yeah.
and so, like, I mean, like, scene 1, I did a oneer, right? And in the notes, it was like, we heard this is all we had. And I was like, oh shit. You know what I mean? Like, and time will tell. I hope that people are happy with the creative choice. I think it works, and it felt like everybody that was there felt it worked, because I feel like Penn
That's a good sign.
would voice concern too. And my also hope was like, I'm coming into this off of a recap, and off of like the fact that people will have probably watched 1 and 2 and they're going right into 3. I don't think you're ever watching it in a vacuum. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And at first I was like, man, did I fuck up? Just being honest. You know what I mean? Like, did I fuck up? But, all I seemed to get from the folks who were working with me creatively, at least on what I was doing with it, were like, no, this is cool. This is great. Like, you could, that feeling is enough to make you say, I ain't doing that shit. You know what I mean? Like
I know.
that, like seeing that in a Word document is enough to make you be like, maybe I should make sure people don't put that in Word documents anymore. But I also can't psychoanalyze, like, where it's all coming from. Like, I feel I made a creative decision that works with what is happening. And I can't say more about it, but there are other reasons that I had as a storyteller that I thought were working as a handshake with the approach. But I just feel like you got to do it. You got to find a place to do it, and you got to put it somewhere that you're not stepping on a central, like, construct of the show. And this particular scene, because of what it was, didn't feel like it was a central construct of the show.
Right.
So,
well, look, I mean, I haven't seen it, of course, but for me at least, it's sort of just exciting that you made a choice, and a specific choice. And I think, and I'm not trying to beat up on showrunners, they have arguably the toughest job in show business, and I really mean that.
For real.
But I think it's for them, you know, there's always going to be the knee jerk of like, we just want to have as many choices as possible.
Yeah.
And I understand that inclination, but ultimately that also sort of flies in the face of what you and I are trying to do, which is make something have a real specific point of view versus spray and pray, right? Or
Right.
hose it down, figure it out later. I mean,
Right.
there are many episodes of TV for many years that have been made that way. And none of them are the TV episodes you and I remember, you know what I mean? Where
Right.
you're just hosing it down. And then the showrunners and the editor are finding something in the edit.
Right.
I mean, that's not really filmmaking. Like that, again, that's the kind of thing that you can have, you know, the DP and operators just go cover the shit out of it, and you don't
Right.
need to be there. So I feel like the fact that you're infusing it, it was something that you feel passionately about. I mean, I think that's going to resonate. Is my feeling, and I just like that. Sometimes, I mean, I'm going to go back to your two camera thing. It's like the only control you have as a TV director, at least in my world,
Yeah.
is what you shoot and what you don't shoot. Because
Right.
if you shoot it, it can go in the show. Even if it's a shitty shot, out of focus, whatever it is, like they can put it in. And
I've seen it happen.
I know you have. And a lot of times, I've been there too, as I know you have, which is like, no, this is going to be one camera because for me to jam in the second lens, I'm going to have to move A over and the eye line's going to be wider. And then this one's going to be kind of like a little lower than I want to do, blah, 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 blah. And suddenly you end up with like two mediocre frames. I'm like, I don't want two mediocre frames. I want, if they can be two great frames, great. Otherwise, I want one fantastic shot that can be in the show and is going to service the performance, et cetera. So it's like, yeah, B's going to stand down and you can bitch all you want, but I don't, I know if it's not you, the showrunner, somebody at the studio is going to be like, could we tighten this up? And they're going to be, oh, well, we've got this other shot we can cut to. Or if it's not at the studio, the network's going to say it. Or we have to get it down to time. And then suddenly you've got two mediocre shots that are like in the show versus one really good one. So I do feel like, to an extent, I'm not saying you go through every show and go, everything's going to be a oneer now, and I'm just going to lock them in. But I think, for the thing, especially those moments that you feel like, okay, I really, this is the scenes that can't be cut from the script. Otherwise the episode falls apart. Right. So it's like with those in particular, I'm going to come to them and I'm going to be really precious about how they're shot. And if it means one camera, it means one camera. Anyway, I'm with you on that whole stop.
Man, is there, and you've been super gracious with your time. Is there, I'll kind of round third right here. Is there one particular sequence that stands out to you from what you've done that you're most proud of, and what is it and why?
It's a really good question. I've not given any thought to that. All right, I'm going to give you three quick ones, even though it's probably more than you want.
No, that's great. That's great.
There is a montage early in Adaline, the movie, that is sort of her backstory, how she became sort of ageless, which required, sort of Model T driving on location, some driving in studio, a real crash, car on a rotisserie rig, landing in something we built on stage, phantom work in a tank. And again, I say this only to say that, like, especially as you get more into VisFX, not that movie was that VisFX heavy, but like, especially as you get into VisFX, like sort of tying all that stuff together and making it feel cohesive. I really hadn't done that before because I'd made two little indies and one little pilot. And that sequence, I think, holds up pretty well. And it was the first time I had to really like make all those elements, and you're shooting them in different order, of course, all over the schedule. And one shot's from our day 0. One shot is literally from day 40 of 40. You know what I mean?
Right.
I also liked the opening to the Superman Lois pilot because I'm a big Superman fan. Everyone is very, very familiar with that origin story and the mythology. And I like what we did there because we just, we got to have some fun, I guess, for lack of a better description. And there's some moments in that, Soup's picking up the boy's hat and handing it back to him, and the kid says, "Nice suit," and he says, "Thanks, my mom made it for me," and he flies off, and the kid's hat flies off again. Anyway, there's
Right.
little things like that, and then last but not least, just because we were talking about You, in the pilot of You, there's when we first meet Beck, we're on location. She comes into the bookstore. Then we're in studio at the library, these sets. And then she leaves and we're back on location, and Penn watches Elizabeth walk out the street. And I just remember being really nervous about tying all those things together, because like the location and the set are different sizes, and it's very sort of, you have to be very specific. And because in that pilot episode, this is like the first 3 minutes of the show, we're trying to set up Joe, Beck, how Joe's mind works, what the tone of the show is, all these things, sort of setting it up as a meet cute rom-com, but with this brooding kind of weird off-kilter undercurrent.
Right.
And I feel like those things all kind of worked in that situation. Again, I this is all me patting myself on the back, but those three kind of stand out. I didn't give you much in the way of why, Pete, but I feel like what I will say for all of them is, and for, newer or aspiring filmmakers out there, like, I prepped the shit out of them. I really, like, within an inch of its life, shot listed, storyboard, and in the case of Adaline and Superman and Lois, prevised, and like, you come in with a plan and you really you express that plan early on to your department heads in tech scouts and sequence meetings, and you make sure that you're not. Everyone knows if you have a stroke in the middle of the day, everyone knows exactly where the camera's going to go, and you know what I mean. It's like, that's how well, and not to say you don't deviate on the day, but at least you go into the day with that battle plan really, really dialed in. So anyway, those I think remind me that there's no such thing as too much prep, really.
Awesome. All right, a bunch of quick questions. Do you use Scriptation? And if so, how?
It's funny. I just started really using Scriptation just because I I've got my iPad here. I really like this writing on this, you know what I mean? And then as new drafts come in, I'm like, oh, all these handwritten notes. And then, being able to sort of quickly have them assimilate, So that's really where the Scriptation has been huge.
What is your diagnosis on where the industry is heading? And I know that's a super big question, but in the sense of if you had to kind of distill
give you
it
the
into
30-second.
Yeah.
We are in a moment of contraction, obviously. I mean, you've watched on the feature side, the last couple of weekends have really freaked me the fuck out, if I'm being totally honest. But more specifically on the TV side, I mean, we're in a moment of real contraction. Obviously, we spent years and it was great. All the streamers duking it out, trying to outspend one another, which meant a ton of content, which meant a ton of work for guys like you and me. And now it's like the shareholders going, hey, we got to be profitable too.
Right.
And we had the pandemic and we had the strike. And so my view is we are in a bit of an overcorrection. And I'm saying that a little bit with fingers crossed.
Right.
And that next year we'll never return to the sort of 2017, 18, 19 kind of run up there. But that my hope is that, look, there's still a need for content out there. And I do feel like the pendulum will swing back a little, just not all the way to where it was in the sort of pre-pandemic, streaming peak TV era.
It's a positive take.
I'm trying, man. Otherwise it's too bleak. It's too bleak.
And then what's next for you?
Well, funny enough, I'm going to go do the finale of You this summer, which I've never done a finale. And again, I haven't really worked I haven't directed any of You since the 101, 102 block I did in season 1. So it'll be really great. I mean, I've seen Penn a little bit because I was a little bit involved in season 2 and a little involved in season 4. But it'll be great to be back in New York, where I love working. I love that city. I love working there. back with Marcos, who has become a dear friend. And I mean, he has become like a real sounding board for me as I've gone through my career, because he's got a few years on me. And I just think he's amazing and so smart, and love him. And Jason Sokoloff, the producer who did that first season with us. And I did another pilot. I did the Prodigal Son pilot with in New York a few years after that. And it'd just be good to see everybody and to be able to like bookend the show, you know?
Yeah, man.
So that's the
cool.
most immediate thing. I'm going this summer to do that. I'm really excited to do that. And then I wrote a movie for myself, which I really haven't done in a long, long time, that Aaron Ryder, who produced Arrival, is producing. And we were hoping to make it this fall in Germany. It looks more likely it's going to be the top of next year, but I hope that is the thing that follows the U finale, because I've been really itching to get back into the feature saddle and back with something I've written where I feel like I have both hands on the steering wheel, as it were. So there's obviously a lot of other development and stuff like that, but those are the two most immediate things that are coming up.
Awesome, man. Well, Lee, it's been a pleasure having you on. Renee said we would hit it off after I chatted with her.
Did.
And I appreciate you taking your time to just kind of talk shop, man. And
Anytime.
It's a pleasure getting to know you a little bit better.
Likewise, Pete. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a total pleasure and a lot of fun to talk shop about the job. I don't get to do this with other filmmakers, and it's super helpful and enlightening. So thanks for making time.
I appreciate you, man. What's up, people? This is Pete Chapman. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter via @PeteChapman. Follow the pod on IG via @Let'sShootWithPeteChapman, and hit up our mailbag with questions, suggestions, or hey, donations if you're feeling like it, via let'sshootwithpetechapman@gmail.com. And just in case you need to know how to spell it, that's Pete with the last name CHATMON. Let's Shoot with Pete Chapman is produced and edited by the multi-talented cut creator Tristan Nash. Assistant produced by the young mogul Jada George, and features the wonderfully gifted Kelly McCreary as our announcer. It's written by yours truly, but I mostly come up with these questions on the fly, which you've probably noticed. Go ahead and get your podcast swag via PeteChapman.com and leave a review on iTunes if so inclined. That shit matters. Let's Shoot with Pete Chapman is sponsored by Scriptation. Scriptation makes it easy to go paperless on set, increase your productivity, and save hours of time. Let's Shoot listeners get a special discount on Scriptation Industry Pro. Go to scriptation.com/Pete to learn more. All right, y'all. Thank you for listening. We hope you've enjoyed season 5 of the show. We'll be back later this year with new episodes and inspiring conversation around the entertainment industry by the people that power it. In the meantime, stay safe, spread love, and keep creating, and write that review. Peace.